All right, so just mechanics of how this sort of double session thing we concocted is going to work. So the session is broken up to two parts. My part's called Distribute All the Things, which is more focused on content distribution or WordPress in the era of multiple content channels. After I talk for about half this double session length, my friend Jake Spurlock, the other Jake will be easy to ask questions, at the end is going to do a quick switch with me, and then he's going to do a talk that's much more focused on specifically how, in particular, Condé Nast has monetized all these channels and how what their strategy has been to very specifically employ all these techniques. So, and then his talk is probably going to be a little shorter than mine, and then what we're hoping to do if the timing works out is both come up at the end. If you have any questions generally about distribution and these platforms or monetization, we'll split them up, and I'll be very confused who you're asking to answer your question. So quick background and context. So I'm the president and founder. I'm Jake. I'm the president and founder of a company called 10up. We're a fully distributed team of about 125 employees that work remotely from around the globe. We think of our mission as making a better web with finely crafted websites for content creators. Not surprisingly, given a focus on content creation, that means we end up with a large and healthy portion of our client base being publishers. One of the things that I get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment out of at 10up is we get to work and do projects with everything from the largest news organizations in the world that are solving publishing challenges and have a certain frame through which they approach questions like distribution and questions like strategy, all the way to what I think of as more of the digital-first group of publishers that are really able to do some more experimentation at the forefront, still trying to figure out what it means to be a scaling, growing, modern publisher. So one of the ways we think about making a better web and finally crafting websites is we have what we call sort of a modern full stack or modern full spectrum of services. So we do everything from trying to figure out how to make these things work at the systems and infrastructure level, all the way up through design and UX and engineering and front-end engineering, all the way to, if you saw Ben Ilfeld's talk yesterday, all the way up to what we call audience and revenue strategy, which is at the most forefront of how does all this design, how does all this engineering actually translate into tangible business return for customers. So among that group, we spend a lot of time thinking about business success in digital publishing, because we believe that when our customers succeed, when digital publishers succeed, we succeed. If I didn't already say it, we think a lot about this because we think our success and our long-term survival means helping this landscape succeed. So, sort of expectation slides. What I'm not going to do in this talk is dive 10 feet deep on every single distribution channel that's out there. We don't have the time for that, and my guess is if you're at this event and you're in this room, you've probably heard of things like AMP and Apple News. I don't need to tell you what they are as platforms. We'll touch on most of them, but my goal in this talk, giving it for the first time, is to provide a framework to think about a channel strategy, to think about when you're sitting in that room debating where is this going, how should I think about different platforms and different distributions, provide a bit of a framework and some fodder for thought in that conversation. Maybe a few tips along the way. So all good educational narratives start by scaring their audience. That's why I thought I would go all the way back to starting with Britannica, which was a large, long-term investment company for a long time. It ignored a reality for a long time of changing distribution, changing ways consumers were seeking content. As everybody in this room probably knows, they thought that web thing is cute, that CD-ROM thing is cute, but we have a long-term viable business model and our revenue per customer is very high, so we can wait this out. Didn't work out that well for them. And it's not the only example. History is ripe with examples of changes in consumer behaviors, changes in industries, pushing out players who can't keep up. In publishing specifically, that tends to mean changes in the way content is distributed, changes in the way content is shared out. It's not new to, just print either. We've been through major changes in distribution in digital media, in digital technologies as well. So I would say that maybe after sort of the first major disruption was not print to web. The first major disruption for content that was more evergreen, that wasn't snapshot in time, news of the moment, was high storage portable media for evergreen content that quickly pushed away an era of solutions or publishers like Britannica. As everybody in this room knows from the chuckling when I put up Encarta, that didn't work out. 2009, Encarta fully shut down operations, and they put out this statement, which I thought was to the point, but also telling when you parse it, which was, people today seek and consume information in considerably different ways than in years past. As part of Microsoft's goal to deliver the most effective and engaging resources for today's consumers, has made the decision to exit the Encarta business. The part that stands out to me in this sentence, the part that they put first in this sentence, wasn't consume, was seek. Wasn't just that it was a different platform that was more engaging, but the ways consumers were looking for information, the entry point for a relationship with content was changing. By the way, as a footnote, Britannica is not out of business. They actually do have a website where you can go and search their archives. They actually, every few years, do put out DVD-ROMs of them. I had no idea when I went to research this, and I guess that's kind of the point. So if you're on the editorial side, most people that I know, I was interested in journalism, a career in journalism when I started my career, before I went over more focused on the platform side and the digital engineering and design side of the house. And so I know that most of you, if you're actually in the content and editorial side of the business, what gets you up in the morning, what makes you want to be in this business, is in some measure a desire to reach, as simply put, as large of an audience as possible. It's a desire to have as many people as possible consume the story that you're trying to tell, to have an impact, to have an influence, which oftentimes means reaching an audience. That audience can be different sizes, whether you're more niche or whether you're more national or international in terms of the audience you're trying to hit, but ultimately, whether it's a small niche or it's a huge niche, you're trying to get as much impact in that space as possible. In the category of saying the obvious, that means being in the places where your audience and prospective audience is. It means needing to be in the places where they're looking for you and they're ready to find you and begin a relationship with your brand and content. So if you're on the business side of the house, or if you worry about being able to do what you love full time, you know that you're required to balance that. You're required to find the optimal point where your reach is counterbalanced against the maximum revenue per reader, or maybe even more specifically in the current era, revenue per engagement with that reader. The other sad panda part of this talk is that the truth is, especially in the mobile era, where there's shorter engagement and shorter attention spans and an even wider potential reach in terms of number of engagements with your audience, where we have what we call the revenue and traffic gap, which is after a certain threshold, you can start to see traffic continue to go up and up, can even rapidly ascend, but revenue doesn't necessarily grow with that. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that some of these new channels, some of the new ways that we're reaching audiences, whether it's just a responsive website with a smaller screen and fewer chances of ad viewability or impressions, or just shorter attention spans and willingness to tolerate something like a paywall, or whether it's a new platform like Flipboard or Apple News changing and restricting the way you're able to monetize, that we have a gap that we have to face. So we did the scared part of the talk. So I've reminded you that we have these conflicting challenges. We need to keep up with changing distribution because we don't want to become Britannica again, even as we see a questionable relationship, even more so than the jump from print to web, between growth in traffic, growth in audience acquisition, and actual business success. So I want to put that a little bit more in context. So a brief history of news, distribution, and syndication. So the concept of multi-channel syndication is not a new one in our industry. Entire companies, entire businesses have sprung up on the premise of we're going to create content, we're going to send it out to all of these different channels. Sometimes we have different relationships with those channels. Some are more lucrative than others. Oftentimes in the past, with like the Associated Press as a prime example, they're not even pre-formatting what that looks like. It could appear in different mediums, different width pages, could be in a magazine, could be in a newspaper. There's maybe some set of recommended images that go with it, but they're dealing with different layouts. They're dealing with not knowing exactly where their articles or content is exactly going to be placed or where it's going to appear. less control over how that content prepares, but an entire business model built around creating content and sharing it out to multiple sources. That's not unique to news. In radio, we have syndication has grown in the last 30 years with consolidation that has had a syndicated model all the way from entire shows to news clippings that are shared out or edited, editorial columnists, even things like comics in the paper. Distribution as a concept is not new. Digital distribution as a concept is not new. In fact, arguably, while more niche, while not as important of an audience in terms of scale, it was even more complicated and more closed when we were sort of in the early to mid-90s. This is everything from, again, that digital media, optical media era, things like putting out CD-ROMs of archives for a year, people that wanted to go back and do research in archives. AOL was a popular source where major publishers wanted to have a voice, wanted to have a presence, and share out their content. These are just a few at the bottom: MSN, CompuServe, LexisNexis, of the many channels, all with completely proprietary, all before we had something like a JSON REST API where we had to deal with, if we wanted to have the largest reach and influence possible, had to deal with sending out content in multiple directions. Even so, as the web evolves, this is a screenshot of the first, let's call it the first real website that the New York Times put out there. In the early days of the web, the way it was thought of was not a primary channel in the center of our ecosystem. It was just another channel, a secondary channel to print, where we would push out content. My favorite part of this, great with outstanding innovators like the New York Times, is this part, the web specials. So the web starts to become, we get to sort of 2000s era, beginning of the 2000s, 1999, 2001, 2002. Web connectivity becomes much more prolific. Higher broadband connections for the time start to propagate. The web starts to become more front and center of a channel, even if it's less clear at that time quite how it was going to be monetized. I think in this old screenshot, ads didn't come through, but they looked an awful lot like print ads, where somebody was specifically selling a static image, just like, in hindsight, a relatively skeuomorphic layout compared to a newspaper being presented. Of course, as it becomes more primary, as the industry goes, instructors go, we start to see a bunch of channels spring off of it. Email distribution, email subscriptions, of course, being one of the first to pop up. As a totally other and different talk. It's sort of interesting the way email's actually circled back as more of its own unique channel and primary channel. RSS sprung up as a standard for people that wanted to have, when we had a lot of desktop readers and desktop consumption as a channel and way to distribute your content and consume it. And for those of you that remember from the early 2000s, we also created this protocol called WAP, Wireless Access Protocol, which created another sort of similar to the earliest versions of the website, a channel in the earliest days of mobile internet connectivity to be able to consume content through a different channel. Brace yourselves. We also tried to replicate models from other ecosystems like television. So we thought channels works really well for media, so we should have channels in our browser. So Netscape in 4.0 and 5.0, this is a screenshot from Windows 98 and Internet Explorer 4 when they tried to shove the internet onto our desktops and introduced the idea that we would change channels on our desktop, introduced yet another way for a bunch of publishers to try to figure out, how do I send my content out to these major web platforms and present it in new and interesting ways? First, post sort of web major paradigm shift starts to happen around 2008, 2009, when this notion of faster mobile connections emerges at the same time that we get that notion of an app store, an app distribution, a more, at least we thought at the time, more significantly different way of consuming content. That gives rise to a set of technologies, a set of challenges related to solving how do we not have to manually create this, right, in every platform? How do we share content in an era where not just mobile apps are rising and new ways of consuming content on phones is rising, but we also have this reality where we're starting to see multiple dominant platforms. A lot of major newsrooms aren't using one system to publish their content. They're often using multiple systems to publish content. So it starts to give rise to this question of integrations. That gives rise to extensions to the RSS standard at the beginning, so that spec evolved quickly, adding new options. We started to see things like media RSS attached to it so we could share content better. wasn't a great solution, so we came up with what we thought was a bit of a better solution, which was XML RPC, which at least gave you more raw data access. WordPress was an early pioneer there, and as everybody knows, REST and JSON APIs started to evolve to the point where we are today, which became an even more sophisticated and performant way of sharing content. Which brings us roughly to nowish. So I want to talk about where we are today in terms of some of the channels. We could spend a lot of time talking about every possible channel you could be in, but some of the channels and how to think about that channel. So we'll start with the obnoxious name that I'm going to give this. My two-axis paradigm for modern digital content channels. Or I think there are two ways to think about current distribution channels. So the concept here is there's sort of two axes on this chart for how I want to think when I'm talking to a customer, how I think about content distribution. So on the first axis, on one side, we have basically a set of solutions that, to be crass about it, is a bunch of companies saying the open web has become awful as a place to go to consume content. We can do this, but we can do it better. I'm going to call that the evolution side of the spectrum, which is they're not significantly changing the way we consume content. They're really changing sort of the medium through which it's delivered, just the channel through which it's delivered. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the people who say, we have the small set of people that are looking to change the game more significantly, who says, whether you're looking at it in an app on your phone, like Apple News, or whether you're looking at it on a responsive web page, it's still basically the same thing. It's still basically a small evolution, and that we can more dramatically change the way people interact with content. And that's sort of the revolution side of the spectrum. The other axis that I think about is that on one end, there's a different way of doing things, but have at it developers, a philosophy that sort of says, we think that current way we do things with HTML on the web is not the way we see it going forward, but we still want to have this relatively open platform where there's a lot of room for experimentation and a lot of room to try new things. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the you don't really know what you're doing, just send us your stuff, send us your content, and we'll take care of making this look good for you, end of the spectrum, or what I would call the more sort of the open versus constrained axis. And as a gross generalization, the way that I think about it, depending on sort of what a publisher's appetite is, as you move from very evolutionary and very constrained as an option up to more open and more revolutionary platforms, complexity increases in terms of the investment you have to make, and also the long-term opportunity increases in terms of what you might get back for making that investment. So starting, before we get into like even the current digital ecosystem, I want to make this sort of point here that this is not evergreen. This is not a static chart. Usually, most of these channels, most of these solutions are moving and moving frequently. Across this chart, they're evolving and they're changing. So for example, when the printing press comes out, when news distribution starts to emerge as a mass market vehicle, that of course is completely revolutionary. It's open as long as you can put the letters on the page and the ink on the page. You can do whatever you want with the medium. And of course, now, as time evolves, it's at the very far end of its quote-unquote the old ways of doing things. And still, you have a lot of control over where you put things on the page, but at the end of the day, when you think about modern media and you think about modern engagement, the ways people want to interact with content, it's somewhat constrained in terms of the user model. Same story with one of the first major disruptions to print that changed the market. Television, broadcast news starts as we can do whatever we want as long as we can point the camera and broadcast it. Starts as very revolutionary, a complete change to the way we think about news consumption. And then as these things tend to go, over time, it moves over here with papers where it's somewhat constrained in terms of interactivity, in terms of on-demand, in terms of when we want access to our content, and it's it's a bit of the old way of doing things. So let's talk about current platforms. So we have websites. We'll say with HTML5. Starts, of course, as we just went through, became a revolution, became a completely new ways of distributing content. I'm calling it somewhat constrained at the beginning because if you tried to make a website in late 1990s, early 2000s, it would be a pretty restrictive affair. and actually moved up here, where it's become incredibly open, incredibly flexible as a platform, but also now not sort of the way we talk about things as the future. It's sort of now the standard, the status quo for how the minimum you have to do to present your content. RSS is, as a early distribution offshoot, sort of down here in the corner. It's pretty constrained. You control it. You can extend the standard if you want. You can put what you want in your feed. But at the end of the day, it is a fairly restrictive standard, and it's really just sending the same content, the same information, and just putting it in a standardized format. Early experiments that maybe even started as attempting to be more revolutionary, things like distribution to Kindle for newspapers, where you could send out your content and your news on a digital medium where you didn't have to deliver a paper, didn't end up being terribly successful as new platforms evolved for mobile content consumption. As we just talked about, app stores start as another revolution, another significant change to the way we consume content. They started fairly restrictive in terms of what those apps would let you do and how it would let you interact with the user. Over time, apps became more open across platforms, more flexible, but also started to become more of the status quo. And in fact, a lot of organizations are starting to move away from apps as consumers actually start to remove more apps than they add from their devices. Things like YouTube, and YouTube in particular, that introduced the notion of massive broadcast to a huge audience without needing the infrastructure of a television system, starts on more of the revolution. It's now probably somewhere in the middle. I still think there's an argument to be made as those platforms evolve that it could really change the way, especially as a new generation gets older, it could still really change the way people consume content. It's not just print on a screen. It's a different way of consuming content. You're seeing right now a massive shift in organizations toward embracing video as a major platform. AMP, I'm starting to get some of the more interesting and the newer ones. AMP I put up here, probably have a large debate about this one. AMP I put up here in this quadrant because I do think compared to its competitors, it's relatively open. It's not like you can give back to Google what you think AMP should be as an open body, but it is open source. You can fork it if you want to. It's as long as you operate within the confines of what the platform, the engineering developer platform can do, you have a lot of creativity for how you can render the page. It's almost a regression back to simpler, more basic days of websites. But it's also fairly evolutionary, right? You're not completely changing the way your consumers are getting their content. You're just presenting it in a different way. Down here, we sort of have the Apple News. We could put Google Newsstand down here, the Flipboards, the ones that are very constrained. This is what you're allowed to put in here. Maybe starting to move a little up the open spectrum as like Apple News opens up to DFP and other platforms, but very constrained and very evolutionary. This is basically the same way that you consume your content, but we can do it better without slowness and the terrible ad experience. Facebook Instant Article, same story. I'd maybe put it a little bit more toward like a notch more toward open in terms of what its spec lets you do and how it's growing, and a little bit more in terms of experiencing it in your social feed toward revolution. But basically, this is sort of the corner of we can just do this better for you web. There's one asterisk I think is important to think about when you're sort of people are dismissing, at least today, Apple News and Facebook Instant Articles, which is it has, at least for the distributor themselves, it has the potential to be revolutionary because there is, to use an overwrought word, there is an AI component to this. There is a bit of like, the way you're sending your content isn't different, but you can see them nudging toward a place where when you pick up your iPhone, it knows the news that you're interested in and sends it to you proactively. You can see a place where Facebook in the scary quadrant where Facebook understands when you're opening up the different ways you engage with Facebook and its social channels, the kind of news you want to see, the kind of media that you want to interact with. I think maybe one of the better examples of things that can be in that quadrant right now, which is sort of the most speculative, are things like Alexa or Google Home or this new era of platforms where it's not just we don't like websites and we're going to do it better, but it starts to introduce the notion of we're going to change the way content is consumed. You're going to be driving your electric car and asking, tell me the latest news about, pick your subject, about Spain or whatever else is going on, and it's going to be a voice interaction model instead of a print on the page. And that will introduce questions about how do we monetize that? What's the advertising vehicle? It becomes the primary channel. This can be sort of in the revolutionary side of the quadrant. And then, again, it's the most speculative side. You can maybe say, does VR, does augmented reality, do a new set of technologies that we see emerging present very new questions about how people are going to want to consume their content. It's a little thing that comes into my periphery that gives me a news. How do I monetize that? How do I talk to my audience? And sort of the unknown in the most revolutionary and open. I want to lay this over the chart again because I want to emphasize again that it's both complexity and long-term opportunity, and it's potential, which means that you could make a big complex integration in something more than read me my news, in an interaction model with something like an Alexa or Google Home. You might be ahead of the curve. You might be the Encarta to Britannica or the Wikipedia to Encarta, but you may also be going down a wrong path. You may be spending a lot of time investing in something that's not because it's speculative and revolutionary, going to take off as a platform. Stay on this for just a moment more. So I made this point, highest risk to reward in this quadrant, least effort, so pretty easy for publishers to get into this part of the ecosystem if their goal is to reach as many as possible. You also know, and the other Jake will talk about this in the next session, probably also the most devaluing, even going back to RSS and how do we monetize it, the most devaluing part of the spectrum in terms of what's my control over how I get a subscriber, over understanding my audience, over even what kind of ads and where can I place my ads in monetization. And then I would call this quadrant a website app sort of lowest short-term risk, which is they still takes a good amount of effort to build an app or a website or to do anything other than a very simplistic implementation of AMP. But they're also the lowest risk in the sense of there's a big audience here, you have control over it, sort of the standard. So where the digital CMS fits into all this. So the original CMS, a screen of HTML where the sheet of paper gets handed to a developer and told to put it on the website. We then evolve into content entry systems. I'm going to whiz through this, which is instead of giving it to somebody to code, I'm going to type into just a screen that maybe lets me bold text or pick my images, but basically a text creation experience when I input my content into the system. We then start to evolve, which I think is sort of the era we're in right now, or I think frankly, I think we're kind of getting toward the tail end of it at the moment, which I'll explain, which is the CMS as a content and website design system. It's where you see things, I think the long-term platforms like Gutenberg are going. It's where you see all this excitement around a lot of these proprietary platforms that give you this whole page builder experience. A lot of page builders, sponsors here today, trying to do this inside of platforms that are more open like WordPress, so it's not just I want to enter my content, it's also I want to design my content, I want to design my layout, the CMS. It's trying to solve all of those problems, presentation layer. That takes us to, I think, sort of the era we're really starting to rapidly get into, which is this era of multi-channel content distribution. And the notion here is that the CMS is becoming not the center point, not the whole experience of your website and how content is designed and created and experienced, but it's just becoming the hub of a strategy where you push it out to multiple places, multiple points of engagement. I want to highlight, we talked about a lot of these different platforms, there's a lot more we could put on this slide. I do want to highlight for a minute here that there's a parallel trend that's not accidental, it's being brought on by some of the technologies that are supporting things like AMP, which is the notion that your website is not necessarily part of your CMS, but can actually be just another channel. Right, so the introduction of technologies like React, like AngularJS, that are actually solving in many cases originally for how do we make those other channels better, like Facebook, like the way Google delivers things, AMP and some of its other experiences. The notion that the website, the way that the content's presented through your browser just becomes another channel. It just becomes another way that you suck content from an API and present it. A trend which I know there's a couple of lightning talks about, and I think there are some unconference sessions, not accidentally at the same time a very hot topic. And I think when you look at that, you can start to see a path where that's just accelerating. And as these other channels that all surround it pick up steam and become more of a center point of engagement, that it's less the website is the center of the universe, just like print was the center of the universe with the newspaper, and more the website's just another channel where people consume their content. If you haven't tried, just as a quick sort of example of this, a site we built, WAMU, which is all built on React. If you haven't experienced, I know many other people here have built React-based websites that have that headless approach. If you haven't played with one of those websites, you should do it because I think it's eye-opening when you think about detaching from the CMS and relying on the CMS as the website rendering engine. It's almost an entirely different world in terms of the experience and the way that you're engaging with your content, and actually very promising for open web and technologies. So what does this all mean? So it means that central content data storage systems, the central content and data storage system in your CMS, and the content entry system, the way you put content, the way you manage and curate content with your CMS, is increasingly what it's all about, what the role of the CMS is. So what this means for me is when you're sort of thinking about platform strategy and you're thinking about where you want to be over the next several years, the editorial and the writing experience becomes more important. It's more central to your decision making because that rendering side is less important. The ecosystem of third-party integrations becomes important because as we get more and more of these channels, knowing that as these pop up on you and as these channels change and evolve, that you have integrations ready, that you're able to plug into them, that you're not locked into something is increasingly important. There's this increased emphasis on APIs and data accessibility. It's not the highest emphasis in the current era because there's the number of channels we have. It's more important that there's just a good ecosystem that pushes out to the channel. If you talk to a publisher, they're less concerned about how are all my APIs and more about can I go to AMP, can I go to Apple News, can I go to these third-party integration points. I think the big important point here is what's decreased in importance, in my view, as we go into the next few years, at least for this kind of publishers, news creators, this kind of content creators. Website generation and presentation system, so PHP is not that great of a rendering engine. I don't want to do page loads where I have to go back on the server side and call to my CMS. Much less important as we go into this era because that's much less the role of the responsibility of the CMS. Website layout and design tools, I think, decreased in importance because as you think of like how, we'll talk about this more, but as you think of like I'm going to push out to all these channels, and as the website becomes, again, less of the dominant channel, the notion that you're going to preview it in 15 different channels and worry about its layout, I think is going to decrease. And it's a trend that's only accelerating with the Internet of Things. So, you know, as we start to think about what it means to have like cellular watches where you might not have to carry your phone around, but might still want to stay in tune with news and how we get that content. I don't think anybody's yet figured out how to do wearables and news consumption well. Larger screens and interaction models in our living room for getting content and how you monetize it. Other voice platforms and platforms that are changing the way through AI and through voice interaction models, the way that we're going to consume and become a primary channel for getting content. Did I mention the ecosystem is really important? So let's talk a little bit about where I think if you look at other technologies, where is this all heading? So if I said sort of like the where we are maybe yesterday, sort of the CMS is the content creation engine. It's where you go in to write your content. It's a place where you organize and curate and store your content. And it's now become this presentation system where you worry about how you want to lay out and curate and present your content. And I'm sort of arguing that the thing that we're on the cusp of that we're dealing with now is presentation layer coming out of the responsibility of the CMS and just becoming one of many channels where people consume content and actually render and seek content. I would posit, if you look at where platforms and the way systems evolve and become more subspecialized, that the next era that we're going to enter in as these APIs keep getting better, spurred by multiple channels, is you're going to see the content writing and collaboration, the creation experience actually become pulled out of the CMS as well. I would forecast an ecosystem of integrations with your CMS where whatever your writing tool of choice is, whatever your collaboration tool of choice is, that's a sub-specialized thing that a certain number of companies, a certain number of solutions do well, as detached from the thing of curating and organizing that content and figuring out where you want to send that content. And this is the history of technology, right? Increasingly subspecialized. It's the CRM becoming detached from the CMS. It's social channels and integration becoming detached from the website. What does this era mean? If my guess is right, it means that APIs and data accessibility that I said was of moderate emphasis in the current era, that's even more important because now you don't just need a system to pull a story out, you need a system where you can fully interact with, send content to, share content with, interact with content in the data system. Ecosystem of third-party integrations becomes even more important. You don't want to have your favorite editor have no way of talking to your CMS. We get now in the moderate emphasis category. I think the sophistication of that query and data engine becomes more important. The capabilities of a system that can really rapidly send and retrieve content and share content that really organizes it well. That's the NoSQL, that's the Elastic trend, that's the Solar trend, that's that parallel thing that's happening where we're rethinking whether MySQL and some of these older ways that we store and organize and understand relationships between content are evolving in parallel. The editorial and writing experience now drops significantly from high emphasis to reduced emphasis in the CMS. Again, specifically for content creation and journalism, there might be a different story here for like a marketing-centric site or product-centric site. And again, website generation and presentation system, layout and design tools in the reduced emphasis. If you think this is crazy, you might be right, but I would also challenge you to say, I like WordPress's editor even before Gutenberg. Can't remember the last time I started writing my content and working on my content in WordPress as a platform. I have my desktop tool of choice, which is probably my V1 when I'm writing independently, that I like with Markdown, and it's an iCloud on all my devices if I want to work on something seamlessly. If I'm collaborating, if I'm working with my team, I go straight to Google Docs. To be honest, WordPress for me is the copy and paste and a little bit of layout at the end of my content writing experience. I think the major content creators know this. Automatic has an official extension for Google Docs that can add to Chrome, or you can publish directly. If you have WordPress.com or Jetpack, publish directly into the CMS from Google Docs. And then again, I just want to emphasize this point, which is, if you can imagine a future where the website, traditional HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, is maybe not 80% of your traffic engagement where you're finding your content, but it's maybe 30%, or maybe someday 20%. And people are going into other channels like Facebook as a primary mechanism for consuming their news, who make it more forceful about how you have to present your content. They're going to voice channels. They're going to video platforms and channels where they can subscribe, where it becomes less dominant. Do you imagine yourself spending time in your CMS worrying about the layout and presentation of your content? As if I'm going to design this thing, and as a writer, I'm gonna have a preview vehicle for what it's gonna look like in Apple News and Facebook and Google AMP, and how it's gonna sound like when I try to talk to my content? All right, so trying to get to the point here, what does this all mean for platform selection when I'm thinking about, when I'm having a conversation? I have a feeling I'm probably preaching to the choir in this room, but when you're having that conversation with your business, when you're having that conversation with those rooms where they're debating what the right platform is, what the right way to think about the future of their CMS is, I sort of have four things that I think apply here, four big conclusions to take away. One, beating a dead horse here, presentation layer and content design features are less relevant. Right now, the content creation experience, the editorial experience, curation is what it's all about. Editorial UX from content creation through management is higher value than the website rendering system. Extensibility, openness, and APIs are vital. The platform must adapt to a rapidly changing landscape of channels and integrations. Custom is crazy, and economies of scale apply. Truth is, larger developer communities will adapt faster. Channels will be more focused on low barriers to entry for more dominant platforms, which is to say, if you're going to keep up with this rapidly changing ecosystem, the economies of scale you get from a rich developer ecosystem, from a number of players in the space that are concerned about compatibility with their platforms, choosing the popular solutions, choosing the dominant solutions is going to become more important. When somebody builds that next great writer, that next great content writing experience, they're going to be mostly focused at the beginning of where most of the market is plugging into. I promised tips, so I will put these slides online. I'm sure the WordCamp Twitter will retweet it. I'm also Jacob Gold on Twitter. I'll put it there. To make this point, there are already good and rapidly evolving solutions for many of these integrations. There's an AMP plugin that's already baked into WordPress.com that's supported by Automatic. We've made contributions for that. My friends, Facebook themselves, as well as Automatic and some agencies, have contributed to a standard Facebook Instant Articles integration. My friends at Alley have done a great job with an Apple News plugin that solves that problem. There are multiple Alexa and voice projects in the works that are rapidly maturing as sort of earliest notions of how to plug into those systems. Even when you go up to that next layer of complexity in my chart, there are solutions that are designed for dominant platforms like WordPress that are rapidly evolving and getting good at making it easier and less costly and less complex to break into other platforms like apps. So the emergence of, like, there's a dozen of these if you search, of tools and solutions that make it everywhere from really easy to relatively easy with a little bit of polishing to get into an app platform. I imagine when the next generation of like wearable devices and watches gets more sophisticated, you'll see that quickly evolve as a set. You'll see a set of solutions quickly come out that make that less costly and less custom. As if to like underscore this point, just an example of an announcement even back a couple of years ago from somebody like Google talking about, we have this new set of features that we think are really important for people writing content, and we really want to get this integrated with your CMSs. So like, here's the who's who of the platforms that we're worrying about, because this is where most of the market is for the audience. I think that trend's going to accelerate as you have dominant platforms that own most of the market. They're going to roll. You're going to see solutions roll out quickly that are very specifically targeted aggressively at compatibility with those solutions. Final point, platform and content control is everything. With private players competing to own the consumption experience, we're talking about Amazon Alexa, Apple News, Google AMP. As these private companies compete, an open platform that protects publishers from third-party business interests and choices, I think is very important. Just to sort of over-make the point, what happens, for example, if someone like Apple decides to buy Medium as a platform? Do they want Google AMP rendering on their platform? Do they want it to integrate with Amazon Alexa? Or are they going to be very concerned about their own platforms and their own ecosystem? So I think buying into the proprietary vehicles, buying into things that are not as open, really carries risk for publishers and being caught in the middle of not just a slower development pace, but other interests that aren't yours. In the rah section, I think the point that I'm trying to make, it doesn't have to be WordPress. There are other platforms that have similar market share, similar attributes. But I think it's really important when you're having that conversation to put platform selection, you put platform selection in the lens of where this is going, what's really important today, and where what's going to be really important in the next few years. I hope this gives you fodder and food for thought in having that conversation. That's my part of the talk. I think Jake, if you want to, wherever you're sitting, want to come up and swap out? And, okay.
So glad that I could be here today. So glad that I could talk about distribution. Thank you, Jake Goldman. I don't know where you are now, but thank you so much for the awesome lead-in. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I, like other Jake, want to go down a little bit of a history lesson here about the internet and how to make money on it. But first thing, I just want to say hi. My name is Jake Spurlock. I am a software engineer at Condé Nast. Condé Nast is a large multinational publishing corporation. I work on the Wired tech team. So Wired magazine, other popular brands, Vanity Fair, Bon Appetit, GQ, The New Yorker, Epicurious, Reddit, Ars Technica, blah, 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 blah. Those are all kind of Condé companies. And just some fun history. We were on WordPress for a long time. We recently moved off onto Copilot. And if anybody is thinking about jumping platforms, please come talk to me. But now back to WordPress stuff. Wired originally launched in 1994. My dad claims that he had one of the first Wired magazines, and I mostly believe him, but sometimes I don't. But Wired has been publishing online since 1994, or sorry, it's been publishing on print since 1994. And they're still publishing magazines today. What Wired is kind of known for is their tech reporting, but another aspect of that is a huge impact on design. We've won multiple design awards, and it's a big part of the Wired look, or of Wired as a brand, is the look and the feel and what the brand has going with it. And so it's a very tricky thing when you work in publishing. I don't want to make generalizations here, but if you write a newspaper, maybe when you publish that same article online, it's getting an image, getting the text, and that's kind of where it ends. With Wired, though, we have these very high-impact designs that go into our magazine, and we need a way to be able to transform them online. And then at the same time, and this is what I'm going to be talking mostly about, we want to take high-impact visuals, and then we want to make money when people read them. Let's not be shy about it. If we don't make money, we go out of business. And what's happening to newspapers and magazines all over the country? They're going out of business. So we want to make money. We want to keep publishing. Back in 2010, the goal for magazines was that we would all build iPad apps. Steve Jobs came in and said, we're going to save the publishing industry. We're working with Adobe right now to take your InDesign tools and create a simple workflow to take every page of your magazine and create a 1-to-1 ratio and we can put them online via iPad magazine apps. Wired was one of the first ones. We were a launch partner. And it's actually something that we still do and we still make money from for some reason, but it's something that we want to shut down every single day because we don't need people working on this. We need people working on other stuff. So once again, our goal is to take these high-impact magazine stories and then convert them into high-fidelity, oh, it's so stretched, but it looks so sad, into really cool web features. High-impact Star Wars covers, high-impact online features that make money. And then taking these same feature stories and then pushing them into all of our distribution channels. Whether it's mobile, whether it's AMP, whether it's Facebook Instant, whether it's Apple News, which we have done a lot of work on. Now, when Wired was started in 1994, Mosaic started around the same time, and Louis Rossetto, who's one of the co-founders of Wired, he said, "A transformative piece of software called Mosaic was fast opening a new frontier to the masses, the World Wide Web. It quickly became clear that Wired needed a website. We realized this was the future of everything, and we knew we needed to be there." And so in 1994, Hotwired was launched. It was one of the first commercial magazines, and it separated from Wired in that there was original content that was just for the website. It wasn't just repurposing magazine stuff; original stuff was done there. One of the interesting things about it too is that low bandwidth kind of defined the design and the what we call now the UI or the UX of creating very small images and then lots of text. In 1994, it went from a 14-person team to, in 1996, 180 employees were employed by Hotwired. And the office that I work in today is actually the same office that they had then, but they went from our office to the floor above and then across the street to another building. So it's kind of fun that we are in the same pirate ship that Hotwired had 20 years ago. One of the first employees of Wired was this guy named Jeff Bean. I don't know, some of you guys might know Jeff. So the little story here, Jeff Bean was a 20-something responsible for converting the contents of Wired magazine into various digital formats each month. So great was his faith in the internet, Bean quit his job as managing editor of a newspaper in Santa Cruz to join Wired's fledgling web team as an intern. And if you know Jeff Bean now, he's the senior vice president at Adobe. He's one of the people that built Typekit, and he's an automatic investor through True Ventures. So it's kind of funny that Jeff Bean was back then. An early prototype of Wired was all about these flashy, fun art and stuff like that. This is a largely unused interface. But there was kind of these conflicting ideas about what publishing online was going to be back then. Howard Rheingold, he said it's a place where we could participate in an exchange of ideas. Kevin Kelly was like, it's a global jam session. But Louis Rossetto, always I guess the more grounded person, he was less concerned with these communitarian aims, and he wanted to plant Wired's flag in this exciting new territory, and he wanted to make money doing it. And he said, we're not moving forward until we can justify what we're doing, and we have to understand what the business value is of this. And so this led to Wired's initial major groundbreaking idea for the internet, which was the banner ad. And this is the web's first banner ad. And it was an ad that went to an AT&T microsite, we would call it now, a single-page app that AT&T made. Because at the time, you would go to AT&T and say, we have lots of people at Hotwired that are coming to us, and we want to put you on the map. A lot of times that meant designing an ad, and then also designing the landing page that it would go to, because AT&T didn't have the infrastructure in place to do that. And so if you can't read it, it's a little stretched, but it says, have you ever clicked your mouse right here? You will. So the gaudy banner ad took over the web at 468 pixels wide by 60 pixels tall. Hotwired launched with a banner ad. Originally there was 14 different brands that launched, including MCI, Volvo, Club Med, 1-800-COLLECT, and Zima. But this is the first, according to legend. And so just kind of a step through what Wired kind of looked like at that time. So this is 1994's design. One of the original implications of having a design like this is you often ended up in dead ends. You would click onto a story, but there would be no persistent header or footer or sidebars or anything like that. And so you get lost in this dead end of the web. Later in 1995, the design changed a little bit, and it brought the persistent header to avoid the dead end. And this is there's not tables or anything. This is literally just spaced content. So like, this is pre-tables. Like, think about life pre-CSS. We used to make fun of people that use tables, but think about pre-table design. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. This is later in 1995. You can see more prominent banner ads. And this is one of my favorite slides because it says powered by Silicon Graphics. You got to do something with that money, right? And that means buying Silicon Graphics workstations. And then there's a section on here that you can kind of read. It's the what's new. And this became the prototypical blog. This was updated daily, and there was always new things on the what's new section. And then 1996, even further design on the banner ads, Saturn and a pager ad. No pagers. And then in 1997, and I think this is really kind of fascinating because this is something we do today, is if you notice at the bottom here, there's a stationary area where the banner ad is placed. And what we call now viewability, Wired was way ahead of it back in 1997. So ensuring that ads would always be on the page and that you would have an opportunity to click on them. In 1998, we're getting all kinds of crazy. We've been to Burning Man, and this is what Wired looks like. And then later in 1998, Lycos acquired Hotwired. Now, to be clear here, there's a division that happens here in that Lycos buys Hotwired, but Wired magazine still exists as its own thing. It will later be bought by Condé Nast. So there is a division here that happens. And then in 2006, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, Condé Nast buys Wired.com and reunites magazine and online. So Lycos acquires them. They acquire more of the Lycos look, but still ad placement and stuff like that. And then eventually in 2006, Hotwired just becomes a search portal. It goes back to its roots, basically. And then in 2005, so this is what Wired, not Hotwired, but this is what Wired looked like in 2005. And, kind of that prototypical blog look. This era here is one of my favorite eras of Wired design. This is the Doug Bowman. Doug Bowman, who's at Stop on Twitter, if anybody follows him. So he was the head of design at Google, then the head of design at Twitter. Now he's on his own, but this is when he was the head of design at Wired. And this is one of the first sites that went all in on CSS. And it had daily changing themes that were all controlled by CSS. And Doug has written and spoken about what a jump it was for Wired to make these huge technical innovations at the time. And it just seems like, obviously that's what you would do, but in 2005 it was a lot different. And then in 2006, this is when Wired was Wired.com was acquired by Condé Nast, so the magazine and news were brought back together. And then later in 2007, this was the design of Wired. And up until 2 years ago, this is what Wired looked like, and maybe this is what Wired looks like to you. So I started at Wired in 2014. This is what the site looked like. And I immediately started working on Wired as it exists today. And it's so stretched, but it looks really nice. So in 2015, we finally became responsive. And then just a month ago, actually, I mentioned how we converted off of WordPress onto Copilot. We are now completely, like Alex was talking about, our CMS is kind of decoupled, and we have an API that powers our front end. We have an API that handles all of our third-party distribution stuff, and so that's kind of where we're at today. So now we are completely decoupled. So just a couple other things, just in the history lesson. This is also, 1995 is also when Suck.com started, which is also one of the original blogs on the internet. And Suck.com still exists in its entirety and hasn't been updated since 2001. Suck.com was another Wired venture. And this is also around the same time that WebMonkey came out. And as a Wired engineer, it takes me great pride to, I tried to really revive the WebMonkey brand. So I started a WebMonkey podcast. And back in 1995, 97, WebMonkey was the site that existed. It was the Wired engineers talking about things that they were working on and the innovations that they were bringing forth. And one of those major innovations that Wired developed was this cool new web server technology called Apache. I don't know if you guys have heard Apache or used it, but that's actually came out of Wired, in addition to the banner ad. So once again, you're welcome. And But so that's Apache, and kind of a fun like just screenshot: e-business design, HTML, and then dynamic HTML, DHTML, style sheets, graphics, and fonts. Anyway, so that's kind of the WebMonkey start. And then also at the same time was Hotbot. And does anybody remember Hotbot? So there's I'm going to show a video here in just a second that's going to show like what a Hotbot search looked like. And I wanted to keep it short, and so I had to speed it up 650%. And it's showing like real-time rendering, so this is really kind of fascinating. If you're into like performance and stuff, front-end performance, watch the repaints that happen. So you'll get a reload, and it looks like the page is set, and then you get another repaint. And it's like, why did that repaint happen? So just for funds here, watch this. We're going to do a search for Madeleine Albright. Repaint, and another repaint. Anyways, just kind of a fun thing. So this is also came out of Wired at the same time. Now, just to put all of this in context, once again, we're talking about platforms, and we're talking about how to make money. So right now, up to 2012, we'll say, revenue for a website was put ads on the page, assume that some people will click on them, and then assume that you just need impressions for some of them if you're a big enough publisher. That's how to make money online. Jake talked about the revenue gap that happens at large traffic. And so what we want to talk about now specifically is how to make money on these distribution platforms. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have done that have been specific to Wired, and then some other brands at Condé Nast that are just food for thought. I'm going to kind of start at the easiest and then go down to the most difficult, but just take away some of the things that we've done with. And then I also want to mention just a couple things that aren't necessarily related to distribution platforms that you should probably be thinking about right now. And if it's not in your brain, hopefully I can put it in. The first is HTTPS. How many sites are HTTPS? Hey, that's a lot of hands. That's really great. One thing that everybody needs to be doing is making that change. You need to go to your DevOps people, you need to go to your developers, you need to hire a consultant, you need to go HTTPS. It's going to be a really big deal in about 2 or 3 months. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be a really big deal real soon. The next is Amazon affiliates. Is everybody using Amazon affiliates? Not a lot of hands. If you are doing any kind of like, not everybody this is going to be, but if you're publishing content, it's just too easy to like make stupid money from Amazon affiliates. So anytime there's an Amazon link in your content, there's a million plugins that do this. I have a really easy one that I wrote for Wired. I can happily share. And it just auto Amazon linkifies whatever site you're on, all of the content. So you should be doing. Once again, this is easy stuff that you should be doing to make money. The next thing is newsletters. Is everybody publishing newsletters? Okay, everybody should be publishing newsletters. Doesn't matter who you are, what kind of business you're in, everybody should be publishing newsletters. Why? Newsletters make money. I'm going to say that a lot today, and I've got this slide queued up like 7 different times in this talk. And so at some point I'm going to say, why do we do newsletters? And you guys need to say, newsletters make money. Okay, newsletters make money. The quick stat for Wired, if we can get somebody on our newsletter list, they are 10 times more likely to sign up for a subscription. Think about that. Just getting them on our newsletter, they're 10 times more likely to sign up for a subscription. So if we have an ad on our website, let's say we have 2 ads that are side by side. One of them is for a a magazine subscription that is $12.95 a year. Or if we have another one that says sign up for our free newsletter, what's our better conversion? It's the newsletter one. So we are going to do a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing to drive newsletter growth. Newsletters are so important. It's like there's a whole nother session at 3:45 that Rebecca Monson is running about newsletters. You should all go to that session. I'll go to it. But we need to talk about newsletters and we need to talk about growth. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how and why and all that, but newsletters make money. Okay, the next major thing for Wired, and this isn't necessarily related to distribution, but it is related to platforms, is ad blockers. Who has problems with ad blockers? Who uses ad blockers? I do too. I do too. This is what we see every day on Wired. Somebody loads the page and then that revenue drops away, this revenue drops away, and we just can't. We can't make money if those ads disappear off the site, right? We need to have ads on the page if we're going to make money. And having somebody with an ad blocker is instantly killing subscription offers. It's instantly killing newsletter drives. It's instantly clicking revenue from clicks on ads, and it's killing us. At the tail end of 2015, we did a little internal study, and we saw around 39% of our readers were using ad blockers. And that's a lot, right? 39% is a lot. And so if 39% of your business is eliminated because somebody is using an ad blocker, you're going to be in a world of hurt. We knew at Wired that we could not be in the business. We could not stay in this business if ad blockers were a thing. So there's a couple different technologies here at play. There's some great JavaScript plugins that can help you detect if somebody's using an ad blocker, and then detect it, and then after they fire, you can inject ads after the fact. What we do is we actually hide consumer marketing ads that just look like images in our ad units. And so let's say somebody has an ad blocker on and they destroy the div. We then come in after that and just put a consumer marketing ad that says sign up for a subscription. And so there's like anti-ad block killer, there's block ad block, there's a whole bunch of different tools that are available for ad block detection and then mitigation. What we decided to do at Wired, our product that we built is very similar in technology to how ad block works. Basically, we test to see if our ad was destroyed, and if it was, then we follow up and inject. And what we do after 3 or 4 views is we say, here's the thing with ad blockers. We throw up what we call the veil. We throw the veil up over the content, and we say, we get it. Ads aren't what you're here for, but they help us keep the lights on. So add us to your ad blockers whitelist, and we provide very detailed, explicit directions about how to whitelist Wired. Or pay $1 a week and you get a completely ad-free and analytics-free version of Wired, which is incredibly performant. And if you want a really nice way to browse Wired, that's a great way to do it. Either way, you're supporting our journalism, and we'd really appreciate it. We provide this thing. This can take them to a sign-up page. And then as we rolled this out, we almost instantaneously went from 39% ad block usage to 25%, and then it has long-tailed down to about 15%. So we just instantly gained like 25% more ad revenue via our ad blocker. Anti-ad blocker. Anyway. Anybody, quick questions on that? Does this make sense, what we're doing here? I'm just going to talk about this briefly. I guess we can move this up to Q&A. Okay, so that's one of our platform decisions that we've made to really help revenue. The next one I want to talk about is Apple News. We were one of the launch partners with Apple News. I got to spend a week down at Apple looking at Rashida Jones, like in detail, for way too long, building this story because we're like, well, you know, when we take this up to the other people above us, you know, we need to make sure everything looks good and blah, blah, blah. So, and it's all stretched. It looks way better than this. So Apple News for us 2 years ago was this really hot thing. Our designers, our editor-in-chief was good friends with a bunch of people. I showed you that Steve Jobs slide. They've always loved Wired, and so we were really happy to work with them. That being said, we're now like 2 years into Apple News, and this is me, and speaking on behalf of the company, we are not making a lot of money from Apple News. It's a very difficult platform to be in because we spend a lot of time developing around it. We've spent a lot of time developing our high-touch custom features in Apple News. We've spent a lot of time really trying to make it look good because we enjoy this relationship with Apple. But at the same time, we have made very little money from it. So I'm going to show you some numbers that are recent, and I want to explain why they are so bad. We recently turned on the ability for us to write our own ads into Apple News. Previously, you could use their tool bench, and they would say, we will sell the ads for you. You just have to create the articles, and we'll fill the ads. So we're like, cool, that's great, because we don't want to spend time selling ads for a platform that we're not really that into. So our iAd backfill, which is the second number there, which is them filling in ads for us, we were at a 10.1% fill rate, which is not good. Not good at all for us. And our house fill rate is something that we've just turned on, which is 0% because we haven't started running our own ads. So our future goal is to take that 0% and turned it into 89.9%, or somewhere thereabouts, and then let iAd backfill what we don't sell. So once again, I am very keen on Apple News. I really like it a lot, but we have to change these numbers. And I'm just being honest with you guys. Don't expect great revenue from Apple News because it's not there. They recently added a new opportunity in their code to auto-inject ads. We were originally doing it, and we thought our readers were really going to throw a fit if they were seeing a lot of ads. And so we were doing like major spacing, like every 5 paragraphs, every like 500 words, we'll start thinking about putting a new ad. What we have come to decide is that is not aggressive enough. You need to have a lot of ads. With their auto placement, this is in their API advertising settings, it starts at 1, and that will put 1 ad in right below the fold. And then it goes to 10. Just put it at 10. You owe it to yourself. We need to make money, right? Just put it at 10. You need to make money. The other option that we're doing is with those house ads that we're going to run. Like I said, we're in the business of making money, and we make a lot of money with newsletter subscriptions. So we've designed a custom ad that says, Wired's biggest stories delivered to your inbox, subscribe. And so we're putting what looks just like a text call out or something like that. But this is an ad that they can track that's part of their publisher platform. And then we're tracking that to see what our success rate is on that. And why do we want newsletter subscriptions? Exactly. All right. Good job, everybody. Okay, let's go to Google AMP. So a couple cool things that we as Condé Nast are doing. The New Yorker is really leading the way for us at Condé Nast. They have a paywall in place that tracks the amount of articles. Using their analytics, you can actually track, we can track the logins and the page counts in AMP in addition to regular desktop or mobile visits. So this has been really cool for the New Yorker, is they can actually offer subscribe stuff right inside of AMP. For us at Wired, if you go to ampproject.com/case-studies/wired, we had a case study written about how we've integrated Google AMP. One of the big takeaways for us was AMP works really well. We really like AMP a lot. We saw a 25% increase in click-through rate. We saw a 63% increase click-through rate on ads. And that was, at the time that this case study was written, that was at 175,000 Wired articles that we amplified, if you will. One thing that's helped us with AMP, and this is similar to what we're doing in Apple News, is higher ad visibility, higher ad frequency. We want to make sure, it's really kind of interesting, when you're on mobile, if there is an ad on every scroll, like as soon as an ad scrolls off, another one scrolls on, that's actually, I think people are fine with that. And so one of our biggest things was like, well, we should have at least 2 or 3 paragraphs, or we should have at least 4 or 5 paragraphs, but you can really, really chomp that down and go really high on the ad frequency without people being mad, like without your reader saying, there's way too many ads. Like, it's a lot of ads, but you got to make money to stay alive. The other thing we're doing is, with our increased ad visibility, we have a lot of KPIs at Condé Nast around video. And so we put videos in the footer, and then in addition, we also put a newsletter subscription form. Why?
Ads make money.
Newsletters make money. Ads make money too, but newsletters make money. All right, the last thing about AMP that I want to talk about, we have not implemented galleries in AMP right now, and the reason for that, and you can read about it in the case study, we have not found a way to deliver an experience in AMP that is at least comparable, if not better, than our own mobile experience for ad delivery, and a user experience that is good enough to, I'm going to hit again on the Wired look. We can't make it look wiredy enough. It looks too generic, and the interaction around it just isn't hot. So we're just not, any article of ours that has a slideshow in it, we don't publish it to AMP. And that's something that we're working with Google right now around that. We're also working with Google on a secret project. Wait, let me stop, hold it, I didn't say that. AMP is supposedly coming out with this new project called Stamp, that's like Instagram stories or Snapchat stories in an AMP format. If that were to happen with some publishers, that would be really cool. And I look forward to the monetization goals around that for whatever publishers might be doing that. Next one is Facebook Instant. I love Facebook Instant. I love Facebook. I really enjoy the Facebook Instant experience. At Condé, we did kind of an internal case study about how effective Facebook Instant is at both delivering stories and then delivering on revenue. And so to do this, we created a test. And I want to be clear here about this test and this case study that we did was over a year ago. Things have changed a lot, and I'm going to tell the punchline here, but it didn't look good for a certain number of our brands. But there has been a big turnaround and some of our brands have changed. But this is our case study from a year ago. So GQ, Vanity Fair, and Wired, we all posted 3 to 4 articles for a period of close to a month. And our main findings were that Vanity Fair saw more mobile traffic coming to Facebook Instant articles. Desktop traffic was lower when we shared it on Facebook. And the lower traffic combined with the lower likelihood to recirculate it generated fewer page views, and as a result, ad impressions per page view were also lower. So basically, when we decided to just kind of drip in some articles, 3 or 4 articles a day, not the full library, we saw both desktop and mobile take a hit on all of our content. So we said, well, Facebook is telling us that if we really do this and we do it well and we push everything, we're going to see some major gains. So phase 2 of our test, we wanted to separate it. We just wanted to publish everything that was Facebook Instant-able. So instead of the 3 to 4 articles a day, it was try to publish everything. And we did it for a full week and overtime. So we developed a scoring model of how we would rank all of this. And so basically 2 different tests. One was Facebook Instant or mobile versus the desktop views. What we did is we did visits times page views per visit. And then the monetization goals were first page view times the Facebook Instant article, mobile article, impressions per page times effective CPM plus subsequent page views times mobile site, impressions per page times effective CPM. So basically we want to say based on a visit, we want to track all of the monetization that happens from that initial visit all the way until they leave whatever brand they're on, Condé or GQ, Wired, or Vanity Fair. So over the course of this week, Vanity Fair posted 89 articles, GQ posted 42, Wired posted 74. This is the scary slide. And that's red and green. The colors aren't really coming through. So Vanity Fair saw 25% more mobile visits, and they saw 14% more mobile impressions per visit. Wired saw 109% growth on mobile visits and 75% mobile impressions per visit. GQ, on the other hand, minus 25%, minus 60% on desktop. Like, GQ was like, they noped right out of there. They're like, we cannot do this. And when you look at the revenue impact, Vanity Fair saw an 11% revenue drop, GQ saw a 51% revenue drop, and Wired saw a 14% increase. So, a year and a half ago, who's still on Facebook? Wired. That being said, Vanity Fair and GQ and all of our other Condé brands do publish some stuff on Facebook Instant. But there's this great slide for Facebook Instant articles. It's like, page views up, revenue up, blah, 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 blah. And we took this to Facebook and we said, this is not going to cut it. Because we can't sacrifice that kind of revenue to be on your platform. And they've been changing things. And like Jake said earlier, there is an amount of AI in that. It's not just like RSS. It's not just like the web. Like, they can juice this, and they have. And it's gotten a lot better for us. This is kind of small, but there is a way to change the ad density inside of Facebook Instant. There's a default, medium, and low. Once again, we're not in the business to go out of business. So put it at default, which is like 250 words per ad. And then something that is just in beta right now for Facebook Instant is you can actually add ads to your recirc module that's at the bottom of the page. And this is something that we're going to be implementing really soon. And because more ads is more money, and we want to make money. And that is about all I have. And thank you for letting me talk.
So I think because of our microphone situation, the Jakes are going to keep themselves mics.
Okay.
And the audience will not have mics, so if you could repeat the questions that are asked of you before answering them, that would be great.
Cool.
And we'll just let you all pick folks out of the audience who raise their hands if that works for you.
Sure.
So, and have about 10 minutes.
Start right here.
We found that certain platforms, Twitter being one of them, if you share a link to one of our articles and specifically amp article, so it actually replaces the link that you share with the article.
Mm-hmm.
And that catalog is that a strategy at all?
So the question is, the thought prior to the question is, AMP articles have been replacing normal articles inside of Twitter links recently, and has that impacted our business strategy or anything around that? We're actually really excited about it. Once again, we really like AMP. We like the experience. We've got the revenue models that make it work for us. And so an AMP article is just as good as a mobile article. That being said, we don't like the galleries and stuff like that, but for us, it works, and we like that. But I think more and more brands are going to be onboarded onto that. Right now, it seems to be just some like major publishers, but I think that's going to be more and more coming in the future. Question there? So I guess I could have been a little more vague. The question is, why should we switch to HTTPS? In Chrome 62, which is coming, that's what's coming late October, I think. Anytime you have a form online, which is like your WordPress username and password, anytime you submit form details, Chrome will throw a flag. It'll show up as an unsecure page. And so if you have a user coming to your site and they're expecting a secured login, which is just like, I don't want my data lost, Chrome is going to start throwing big red flags. I've actually already had that happen. I'm on a bleeding browser, and they're really starting to, like yesterday I got unsecured warnings. Like, because you know how when you connect to like hotel Wi-Fi, it'll forward you? Like, Chrome is now not letting that happen because they see that as an insecure connection that is interrupting the train between your typing google.com and not landing on google.com. So it's just a browser thing that's happening in the next couple of months. Yeah? Down, so the question is, did the revenues go down on Facebook Instant Articles, and what did they go down compared to? So they went down compared to a normal mobile visit or a normal desktop visit. So if we shared that same link in Facebook and the user was expecting to be redirected to a normal desktop view of the article or a normal mobile view of the article, we saw more revenue that way than we did on Facebook.
Well, Facebook will still, it's very obscured how whether they actually weight Facebook Instant Articles presentation in their algorithm or not. They say they don't, but they will present a regular page view if an article is shared. They'll typically push over.
And then even on desktop, you're gonna there's no Facebook Instant for desktop, and so you can adequately track a mobile or a desktop. So in our reporting suite, we have Facebook Instant, AMP, desktop, mobile. We have all these breakdowns. Well, it's just sharing the link, and then it's how that link is distributed. If the user ends up getting on a Facebook Instant version of it, how do we, based on that first view and then every subsequent view, how much revenue is generated on that visit per a mobile visit, per a desktop visit?
You can look at traffic, even segmented down to mobile, coming from Facebook as a source, and then based on that, see how much revenue you're generating, as opposed to within Facebook's own analytics, how much revenue you're generating. When it's Spurlock,
you mentioned some pretty interesting magic that you were doing to potentially contact and intermediate people who are using ad blockers. Are there any plans to make that something based on that open source?
Well, that's that one screen that I showed. There's a ton of open source. Block ad block is the one to look at. That's like the big one. So we don't necessarily We're not going to open source it just because we don't have the time for that.
Well, it's also one of the challenges in the publishers we work with is the endless blocking, which is a lot of publishers I think are disincentivized to want to share it because it becomes a mass market solution to blocking. The ad blockers will try to circumvent the blocker.
It's actually kind of interesting too. We were about to be blocked or blacklisted on Reddit, on the technology subreddit, because they didn't like getting that veil, and all of their users were like, we're just going to ban any, and we want to see traffic from Reddit. And so what we actually did is we said, if traffic, we look at our headers and say if the traffic comes from Reddit or Google, that puts you on the no veil experience. So like, we do a lot of work to ensure that our targeted demographics will be able to exist without it. And just another note on that, we actually work a lot with Block Ad Block and also with the ad blockers to ensure that we are doing best practices for ad loading and stuff like that. So there's been a couple times where they were blocking the init script that loaded our video players. And it's like, well, even if you have ad block on, we want the video to load. And so we worked with them to ensure that they were hooking on at the right amount of code. So. In the back? So the question was how many people are paying for the $1 a week subscription to Wired. Without giving away many specifics, our real goal with that was just to get people to disable ad block. And so our big win was going from 39% ad block down to 15%. That's instantly just a ton of revenue. And so I'm not going to stand up here and say we have 1 million subscribers and we're going to rival the New York Times with subscriber base. We're not, but it's worked out really well for the ad blocker.
I'm curious, do you know if, I'll ask a question, do you know if you actually make more revenue from somebody that subscribes as opposed to somebody that turns off the ad blocker?
Yeah, I mean, a subscriber, that's our best possible. Well,
that dollar is more than what you can get from a dedicated reader.
Because $1 a week, that's $52 a year. A magazine subscriber is like $12 a year. So just off that, yeah, it's more money, but yeah. Any questions? We haven't done a lot of extensive studies on that yet. One of our big thing right now is we're building custom interstitials we have a mobile interstitial, we have desktop interstitials, it's just a huge initiative right now, and we're still kind of in the gathering intel side of that. Bo?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, in addition to distributing content out from WordPress as a hub, is WordPress also can sort of be a place to collect content from multiple channels and bring it in? I mean, trying to think, it is something some publishers do. I mean, the most simplistic version of that is just bringing in content that they're creating originally on a feed like Twitter. There's a lot of people that, not so much large publishers, but some publishers that think about that are maybe more small and more focused on audience reach that think about things like, can I publish it on Medium, but then also pull it in to WordPress is a popular example. I'm not sure how, it's an interesting premise as sort of like an archival point, but I think it's more likely that WordPress plays the role over time of sort of the center, its evolution as an open platform being the gathering point for all the content to send it out than it is to be just like an archive, a curator of content on external channels. But I don't know if you have any thoughts. I'm not sure I have more to add.
If only there was some plugin like Social Keyring Importer which Bo wrote, that does that. So I have another word.
Is that what I was supposed to? Yep. To me, I think it's more, it's a good question. I want to think about that more. To me, it's more of a niche experience. If anything, I see even like, if you're going to call Twitter a distribution channel, which is, it's hazy. It's more of a linking promotion channel than you're going to consume all of the content and the full story on Twitter. But even in those cases, I think we're seeing more proliferation of tools that make it easier to use WordPress or platforms like it as a channel to send to all of those and create content in all of those channels. Yeah, and again, I like being Jake 1.
I'm happy to take. I'll always play second fiddle to this guy.
Not at all. So the question was in the chart that I presented, which said like in that lower left quadrant of more proprietary, more closed, and more evolutionary, questioning the notion that's sort of devaluing your content. And I think the answer is consistent with my Jake number 1, with Jake Spurlock's presentation. I think so. I mean, obviously there are places where, again, as you move, you'll notice that AMP's not in that quadrant, right? AMP is more open, it's more flexible, and you're hearing a lot of good stories about how people are able to monetize. And I think that's in part because, relatively speaking, it's a pretty open platform. It's evolving to be open in the sense that we can have a lot of creativity in how we present our content. I think it's not coincidental when you hear the story about Apple News, when you hear the story about Facebook Instant Articles, accepting Wired's growth, that as a gross generalization, the restrictions that they're putting on those platforms, number one, the restrictions in terms of like what you can do with monetization, what you can do with ads. I've heard far more stories, I have far more experience with publishers who are seeing it as, again, generalizing, reducing their revenue than increasing their market. It's also devaluing in the sense that you are mixed in with a lot of other channels and creators. The AI is not necessarily going to prioritize your content in your channels, and the presentation is not significantly different among channels, at least right now. So both devaluing from a differentiation and literally devaluing in most cases, as we saw with like GQ and Vanity Fair, devaluing in the sense of not usually better revenue results.